Hi everybody, it's Julessa, and today we're going to talk about one of the most important things about learning to solder, and that is how to control the heat of your torch. Once you understand the anatomy of a flame and know where the hottest points of your torch are, you'll know exactly where to aim your flame on your metal in order to get the most heat as fast as possible in order to get your solder to flow. So let's go to the bench and talk about the flame. So let's start off talking about the torch that I'm going to use today. This is a Smith Little torch. It is probably one of the most versatile torches out there. There's lots of other torch brands that are available to you, but this is the one that I personally choose, and I love this torch. I've used it for years and years and years. Honestly, I think this thing is probably about 14 years old, and the only thing I've ever had to do is replace my hoses because over time they start to degrade and break down. And honestly, it was a very quick and easy installation to swap out the hoses and get new hoses. So this is the torch that I recommend. So we're going to talk about the flame on this particular torch. So I'm going to go ahead and get this lit. The Smith Little torch is an oxygen and propane that I use. I like the propane because it burns cleaner and I seem to get a more consistent heat with it. I've used the acetylene version of this a few times and I didn't quite like it because of the soot it puts off. And I work in a home studio, so I don't like the soot in the house because it makes it really difficult to keep everything clean. But anyway, so this is a Smith torch. This is a number 5 tip. It's the medium-sized tip. And as you can see, I can get a pretty significant flame. Oh, I guess I gotta turn the oxygen on. I can get a pretty decent sized flame. You can see the flame's way out here. I can still feel the heat way out here. And then I can also vary it down to a much smaller flame for smaller, more intricate work. And it definitely goes a little bit smaller than that. And the kit that I have has smaller and smaller torch tips, so that also will help me maintain a smaller tip if I need it. But quite honestly, I use the number 5 tip on pretty much all of my soldering operations, and I really love it. The only time I'll swap out is I'll swap out and use a Page Tools torch tip that has this brass multi-flame, and I'll use that for larger pieces like, you know, I don't know, the watering cans that I did were fairly large. They're about 6 inches by 4 inches in diameter. So I used this torch tip in order to solder those pieces together because it required a little bit more heat. So let's get to it. So first let's talk about the anatomy of the flame. I'm gonna make this a little bit bigger flame so you can see it. And before I add the oxygen to it, you can notice here that you've got an orange flame, and then you've got a blue flame, and what you're not seeing out here is an additional blue flame, and that's because I haven't turned the oxygen up yet. But you can see in a yellow sense in this area, this is what we would call a reducing flame, which means that it doesn't produce as much heat, and it's the better flame to use when you're annealing the metal. I'm going to go ahead and add some oxygen to it. This is what we would call a neutral flame, and this is what you should be soldering with. You can see this blue outer cone and then almost a white blue inner cone, and then I don't know if you can tell on the video, but there's a slight little bit of a yellow hue in this area here for the neutral flame, which means it's got 50% oxygen and 50% propane. That is the ideal flame that you would like to have when you're soldering because it reduces the amount of oxidation that appears on your metal, and it helps drive the heat up so your temperature is much hotter than if it were a reducing flame. Now, the opposite to that is what we call an oxidizing flame. And I don't know if you can hear that, but you can kind of hear the hissing sound, and it sounds like there's more air flowing through it, and that's because I've turned the oxygen level up. And you notice that the size of the white cone blue flame here is much smaller, and it seems a little bit more intense, and you can see a lot more of the blue flame here, and that's because we've got a lot of oxygen going through here. This is not what you want to solder with because that's going to create a lot of dirt and debris in your flux, which will at times hinder your soldering operations. So you want to take it back down to reducing flame, and that just means turning it down just a little bit so you get a little bit less hissing noise, and a little bit more of that orange flame. Now, most people, when they're soldering, I see them either do something like this where they're super, super close, or they're this far away. And neither one of those areas are where you want your flame to be in order to get your solder to flow properly. The point of soldering, especially on sterling silver, is to get the metal up to the soldering temperature as quickly as possible in order to get the solder to flow without creating a lot of oxidation or dirt in the process, because the dirt is what hinders the solder from flowing. So where you need to focus your heat is roughly about a centimeter or half an inch from the end of that white cone. That's going to be the hottest part of your flame, and that's where you want your soldering operation to occur, is right in this area right about here. Out here, it's great for getting your flux to dry up and bubble up and get ready for the soldering process. In here, if you hold it too close, you're going to put your flame out and it's not as hot. This area here is the hottest part of your flame, and that's where you should be focusing your soldering operation. So in essence, heat up your solder, get it to the point where it's getting to the glassy, and then slowly move your heat down into that half an inch to a centimeter to a half an inch area to heat up your metal as quickly as possible, reduce the amount of oxidation, and get that solder to flow as quickly as possible, and then get out quickly. That's the other thing. You want to make sure that you're getting in fast, heating it, and getting out fast. And we're going to do an example of that. But I just wanted to show you. This end here is not hot. I mean, relatively, I guess you could say. It's still hot. It's going to burn you and it's going to melt things. But it's not going to be hot enough, fast enough, in order for you to get your solder to flow. In this area, it's still hot. It will still burn and it will still melt. But it's not going to get the temperature up as quick as it would if you focus your heat or your metal in this area here. So we're going to do an example. Okay, so we are going to solder this piece of tubing onto this sheet that I have here. First thing I want to do is flux the area that I would like to solder. And you notice my flux is actually pulling up on my piece of silver. That's because my silver is dirty. So what we're going to do to rectify that, instead of taking it all the way to the sink and cleaning it, I am actually just going to take a little bit of sandpaper and scrub it just a little bit to clean the surface so that my flux will actually stay to it. And what that sandpaper is doing is removing some of the finger greases and the oils and things that have kind of accumulated up on the surface of the metal because it's been sitting out on my bench for a little while. Now that I've got that sanded just a little bit, I'll wipe off the dust and the debris. Now when I put my flex on there, it should stay in the area that I actually place it. There, now you can see it's not trying to pull up anymore, which is a good thing. I'm also going to flex my tube. I am going to take 2 pieces of hard solder and place it on either side of the tubing. And now I'm going to prepare my flame. As you can see here, I have a fairly small flame. That's not going to be hot enough to do the solder operation on this size piece of sterling. So what I need to do is adjust my flame to make it bigger so that I have a larger surface area of heat that I can focus onto the metal and get that solder to flow. I'm keeping a neutral flame. So I've got my blue outer cone, my light blue inner cone, and the little tiny bit of orange here in the center, which means that my hottest part of my flame is going to be about right here. And what I want to do first is heat up my flux to get it to essentially dry. So I'm going to start with that outer flame, heat it up, evaporate the water that's in there, get my solder moved to the right position so that it's touching both pieces of metal and not sticking to my pick. My pick is too hot. Let me get this side. Ah, it's still stuck there too. There we go. Get that flame there. Okay. I'm going to focus my heat in that centimeter or so of area, and I'm going to keep it moving around my piece of metal. I'm heating up the bottom piece because it's bigger, and I want that area to heat up faster because I don't want to melt my tubing. And there goes my solder flow. And that solder was just a little bit too far away from the tubing. But the other side flowed all the way around, so it should be good. Now, you notice that it got really bright pink. That was almost a little bit too hot. And I was on the verge of melting that piece. So be very careful about that. Be cognizant of that. You don't want to overheat the metal because, one, you can see how black the oxidation got on that as well. And we really won't know whether or not this completely soldered until I can quench it and pickle it and then take a look at the solder joint to make sure that the solder went all the way around. But if you keep your flame aimed over the top in the proper position, it's going to heat that bottom piece up fast enough to get that solder to flow fairly quickly, and then you don't have to worry about too much oxidation. You can pull your flame out and then you're done. So in today's video, we talked about a couple of different things. First, we talked about the anatomy of the flame, which is the most important thing in soldering. You need to know where your flame is the hottest in order to get it in the right position on your project to get that solder to flow quickly with the least amount of oxidation, and then get out of there as fast as you possibly can. The second thing we talked about is the surface area of the flame. If your piece is large, you want a larger flame. If your piece is small, you want a smaller flame. And that's the beauty of the Smith Little torch, is that you can adjust the flame. Some of you may run into that issue a little bit if you're using a creme brulee torch or something where you can't adjust the size of your flame, and that's something you're going to have to figure out with the particular torch that you're using. The anatomy of the flame does not change. That's going to be the same no matter what kind of a torch that you're using. There's always going to be that small inner cone that's very, very light blue. Then there's going to be that larger outer cone that's going to be, you know, a multitude of shades of blue. And then you'll have that small neutral section in the middle of the flame where the soldering operation should occur. So just pay attention to your flame, get familiar with it, get used to it, practice with it a lot, because no matter what torch you're using, soldering is possible. You might have a little bit of restriction on the size of piece that you can do if you're using a torch that does not have the ability to change your gas flow, but you should still be able to do the majority of your soldering operations that you want. If you have any questions or comments, please leave them down below. I'd love to hear from you. Don't forget to like and share this video with other people so we can get a larger group of people watching the videos. And I hope this was helpful for you. And until next time, bye.